Coming up, in this week's episode of TechSNAP, everyone's favorite password cracker just got a major update, and you won't believe what it can do now. The aerospace industry has themselves a new advanced persistent threat, and Microsoft's XML vulnerability is already being exploited. We'll share the details. Plus, we share some IT wisdom in our feedback segment, and a heck of a lot more. That's all coming up in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 65 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We recorded this episode live on July 5th, 2012, and it was released just shortly after that. This episode is brought to you by Godaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us like every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris. Everybody, thanks for watching.
Hello, sir. Happy episode 65 to you. We got guess what? Big show today. We do too. It's the first story that you threw in here is one that I caught the headline and then had completely lost track of it, and I'm so glad that you put it in here because I think people are going to be fascinated by it. But we've also
and it has some interesting implications too.
The segment that I'm looking forward to getting to today is the feedback segment, because one of the emails we've gotten there, I think if we charged for it, could be a multi-$100 project just for like the design doc, and then I think if we actually are going to do the implementation, it could be a thousands and thousands of dollar project.
For sure.
So that'll be an interesting question that we're going to answer today. It's now talk about a good value if you spend time with the TechSNAP podcast. But before we get going to all of that, I have an announcement to make. I'm very excited to say that Jupiter Broadcasting, I've often mentioned that we make some of our bacon every day by you folks out there using our affiliate links, and it's a great way for you to support these programs directly, and it helps us keep advertising down to a minimum. And I'm excited to say that we have added a brand new sponsor on our affiliate lineup. If you go down to the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com, you will find down there links for all of our affiliates and one brand new one, Code School. And you have to use this link in order for us to get credit. But if you use that link, you click on Code School, this is a fantastic online learning how to develop suite of different courses you can take. And what they actually do is they actually have you develop, and they look at it and they critique and they suggest how you could do things differently, and then you can actually run the programs. And they have things on, and they also have basics on just some of the things you probably need to know if you're in the industry, like Git and things like that. So check out Code School. Highly recommended by Michael Dominic, the host of our new Coder Radio podcast. And when he just sung the praises of them, I went out there and I contacted them and got them set up as an affiliate. So if you are interested in some of those topics, like learning development and things like that, check out Code School, link at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com. All right, sir. Let's get into the news, because this first story is great. This is one of my old favorite applications, and they've just released an update. So what's this one?
So John the Ripper, which is a password cracking program, has just released their new Jumbo-6 version, which is all of the community contributed add-ons. So basically, there's John the Ripper, the core version, and then there's the Jumbo edition, which has a bunch of stuff other people have contributed to the project.
Okay.
And the focus of this newest release is mostly been adding GPU support.
Oh,
so that you
cool.
can use your GPU to crack passwords. Although they specifically focused on slow hashes rather than the fast ones. So rather than doing what we've seen with a lot of the GPU stuff, where just cracking plain MD5 or SSA1, they specifically targeted the cryptographic hashes that are really strong right now, which is things like SHA-256 and SSA-512 crypt. So not the regular raw, SHA-256 hash,
low-hanging,
but the cryptographic ones.
They went for the tough stuff.
Yeah, the cryptographic ones where it does like 5,000 rounds that you see in like Arch and Ubuntu now. And bcrypt, which is the algorithm based on Blowfish from Openbsd, which is used in FreeBSD and PHP and a bunch of other places for password hashing. And there's some interesting notes about that. But they also added cracking support for a lot of non-hashing things. For example, they added support for cracking the Mac OS X keychains.
Wow.
Keepass files.
Wow.
So if you use Keepass, the password vault program, basically if you get somebody else's vault, you can sit there and brute force it until you get their master password or whatever.
Now, this is interesting because, I'm a pretty big fan of LastPass, and one of the number one responses whenever I talk about LastPass is we almost always get a comment or an email that says, "What about Keepass?" So this is I know it's popular in our community.
There's another story about Keepass coming up later in the show. But basically, it's not that there's anything wrong with Keepass, but they're just brute forcing it. So if somebody gets your Keepass file and has enough time or enough computers, they will be able to crack it. But that's pretty normal.
Giant Robot in the chat room says, "Censored. I use Keepass." Yeah. See, I told you.
They also added support for cracking ODF and Microsoft Office 2007 and 2010 files.
Wow.
So password encrypted Office documents. The Mozilla Firefox, Thunderbird, Songbird, C Star, whatever else they have, the way they encrypt the master password files. So if you save all your passwords in Firefox, normally those aren't even really encrypted, but if you set a master password where you have one password you have to type in to decrypt the password to use for each different website, someone could attempt to crack that master password, and so John the Ripper has support for doing that now.
That's been the whole Firefox local password storage has been a popular topic on the show in the last few weeks.
Yes, because unless you use a master password, the file's not really encrypted. It's just scrambled. And if you use a master password, it's actually encrypted. But obviously, again, if someone gets that file and has enough time or enough computers, they can crack it. But all encryption can be cracked eventually, right? So it's just about if your password is strong enough that John the Ripper won't guess it.
The list also includes the RAR encryption mode, VNC challenge response authentication, SIP challenge response authentication. I mean, holy crap, Alan.
Yep. And also HMAC, which is a hashed message authentication code. It's a way to prove that a message was not modified during transit. So they have a way to crack those now as well. And also they've added some support for cracking wireless passwords like WPA PSK.
Wow, this update came out with a vengeance. I mean, this is a hell of an update.
It was more than 1 megabyte of new source code. It's over 40,000 lines of new code, not counting lines of code that were just changed.
And is it safe to assume that all of these will be GPU accelerated to some degree?
No, not all of them.
Oh, okay.
There's a link to the full release announcement, and for each one, it lists support for CPU, Openmp, which is multiprocessing, a way to basically make John the Ripper use multiple cores if you have it.
Sure.
Because before you would have to run 8 copies on your machine if you had 8 cores. Now it can do that all at once. So some algorithms are supported in Openmp. Then there's CUDA and OpenCL. CUDA being the NVIDIA graphics card thing, and OpenCL is the one for AMD and a few others. So different algorithms are implemented on different platforms, and they're all listed in the changelog there.
I see.
But specifically, the new hashes they support are SHA-256 crypt and SHA-512 crypt, which are the new basic cryptographic strength SHA password hashing you see in some Linuxes now. Where basically, instead of doing a raw SSH like you saw LinkedIn do, of course, they were using SSH1, not 256 or 512, so theirs was even worse. But when it was just a raw one, it means every user with the same password has the same hash, and that the hashes can be cracked by rainbow tables and so on and so forth.
Right.
With the cryptographic versions, what they do is they use assault, and they also do the hashing more than once. I think the default is 5,000 times. And that's specifically to make it take longer. And that number, 5,000, is adjustable in the algorithm so that you can keep bumping that up over time to keep that algorithm strong enough for current time. But basically, they implemented 256 on CUDA and 512 on CUDA and OpenCL.
Wow.
So they can crack those passwords up to, I think, 10 times faster than on a CPU. And they're still working on making that even faster. Wow. They also added support for Dragonfly BSD's SSH 512 and 256 hashing algorithm, which is not the same as the Linux one. Drupal 7, which is a content management system, kind of like WordPress.
Oh, yeah.
They have basically their own custom PHP hashing algorithm using SSH 256, kind of like what we talked about before, where if each site changed their algorithm a little bit, then John the Ripper wouldn't be able to support every single one. Although actually John the Ripper now has support for a mode called dynamic, where you can tell it how to construct the hash and it will try to brute force them. So you can do things like, the MD5 of the password dot the salt and then MD5, all of that kind of thing. So you can try a lot of different mixes. But also they added support for raw SHA-1 LinkedIn passwords. So specifically support for cracking passwords where the first 20 bits of the data have been zeroed out. Do you remember how in the LinkedIn passwords they zeroed out the first couple digits to mark them as already cracked?
Right.
Well, John the Ripper now has support to read the files in that format and crack them anyway.
This is great. This is just great. This is just great.
One of the most interesting things that came out of this version was the discovery that bcrypt, which is OpenBSD's implementation of the Blowfish encryption system as a hashing algorithm,
right,
is that even on the best available video card, an AMD 7970, it's still slower on a GPU than it is on a CPU due to the nature of the algorithm.
Really?
Yeah, it's basically the math it does is kind of particularly hard for a GPU to do.
GPU wants something that's a little more linear or something? Is that what it is? Yeah.
And so I imagine they're still working on that. But also the code they have only works on a 7970. If you have a less...
That's a pretty expensive card.
Yeah, if you have a less expensive card, you have to tweak the source code a bit to try to get it to work on your card. Because
all right, let me dust off the old coding skills here and just polish that right off.
If you remember, if you were used to do Bitcoins, there was this thing called the work unit size.
Yeah.
Basically, it's set really high by default, and you have to lower it if you have a...
Oh, okay, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's just a constant in a file. And
I'm sure it would not be hard to make that a setting that could be configured.
Yeah. But basically, it's interesting that the Blowfish hashing algorithm seems to be a lot harder to crack than the SHA 512 and so on. And basically, the fact that it can't seem so far it hasn't been successfully accelerated on a video card.
Interesting. And that could become very... Isn't that... Boy, think about that. Think about that as a whole new element to encryption security, is particular types of encryption that are hard for the type of cracking that GPU is opening up. And that could be a whole nother way to gauge the security of something.
Yep.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and it's like Blowfish is, or bcrypt, which isn't actually the Blowfish encryption algorithm. It's a hashing algorithm based on the same concepts.
Okay.
Has been around for quite a while. Like I've been teaching classes to use it for got to be 6 or 7 years now at least.
In fact, I would have almost assumed it was inherently a little more vulnerable because to me, I do associate it as being kind of old.
Right, but the thing is, when you think about SHA 256 and 512, they were specifically designed to be as fast as possible because that's what you want in a regular hashing algorithm, right? If you're just hashing a file for a torrent or something, you want that to be as fast as possible.
Of course, right.
And so that's why they have to do something like do it 5,000 times to try to make it slow enough to be used as a cryptographic hash.
Right.
Whereas bcrypt is kind of...
That was never the intention.
Right. It wasn't written as a hashing algorithm. It was written as a cryptographic hashing algorithm for passwords.
Yeah, the original intent matters.
Yep.
Using technology what it was meant to be used for is pretty important.
And although we talked about it a couple of months ago, there was a flaw in the implementation of bcrypt that caused certain passwords that used advanced UTF-8 encoding to not be stored properly and be weaker than they were intended to be, although that's been fixed.
Okay.
And that was only in some implementations, not all. So it wasn't a problem with the algorithm, it was just a problem with somebody's code that implemented the algorithm.
Huh. Wow. Well, that's a lot to process, Alan. I got to be honest with you. It is really a lot. Alan has busted out the show notes on this one, folks. A lot of the stuff is listed out.
The release notes are much, much longer than I got into.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we just kind of shake all that off with a good old Microsoft XML vulnerability? What do you say, Alan?
Yeah.
All right. What's happening?
So basically, there's a Microsoft exploit in the Microsoft XML core services in all versions, 3, 4, and 6.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure why, but I'm almost sure that there was never a version 5. I don't know why.
It's unlucky. It's unlucky.
Anyway, basically, there's an exploit for an unpatched vulnerability. Microsoft announced the vulnerability on like June 12th, I think. I have the date. Yeah, June 12th, and there's still no fix for it.
That's a bummer.
And it's been actively exploited since before they announced it. But basically, an exploit in the an unpatched vulnerability is now being included in more recent versions of Black Hole, which is an exploit kit that people can buy. So cybercriminals basically buy this and install it on infected or compromised websites. So, people that don't update their WordPress, their site gets in this Black Hole stuff injected into it, and now visitors to their site get infected with this malware. There are numerous attack vectors being used to exploit this flaw. The first one was obviously Microsoft Office documents attached to emails, but also people have used Flash to cause the XML to be parsed, or even now Internet Explorer itself, in a way that you can basically do a drive-by exploit where just visiting the site infects you. You don't have to click anything or download anything or open anything.
Yeah.
The flaw is present in all versions, 3, 4, and 6 of the Microsoft XML core services, and is exploitable on all versions of Windows, including XP, 7, Vista, Server 2003, Server 2008, Server 2008 R2, and so on. Microsoft published the advisory on June 12th, after it was already being actively exploited in the wild. At this time, they don't actually have an update for Microsoft XML core services to fix it. They do have a Microsoft Fix-It solution, which is a little script you download and run. That's supposed to mitigate the flaw, but the text in the TechNet advisory seems to suggest that administrators at corporations would want to read more about it before doing it because it's likely to break application compatibility. Although when I followed the link, it didn't seem to mention anything. I don't know. The Fix-It page is dumbed down a lot.
Yes.
And the advisory page kind of references it and saying that there should be some technical information there, but it doesn't seem to be.
These things just are so hard to read, too. There's just so much crap that doesn't need to be there. They just talk about it. Oh.
Yeah, it's also so much boilerplate.
Yes.
There's like pages in there that are the same in every advisory.
Yes.
It's link that off to a separate page so that it's easier to read.
It's funny because the John the Ripper release announcement was much longer and much more technical than this Microsoft bulletin, and it was infinitely easier to process and read.
Yep. Microsoft's EMET, or Enhanced Mitigation whatever toolkit that we talked about a couple weeks ago, may be able to prevent exploitation of this vulnerability because it's basically accessing unreferenced memory and causing, so basically if you load executable code into a certain bit of memory and then cause the XML driver to read that section of memory, it can end up being executed. So the EMET toolkit may be able to prevent this from being exploited, but as we discussed in episode 62, if you have AMD video drivers, you can't install the EMET toolkit because it'll cause your system to blue screen. And then I have links to the CVE announcement about the vulnerability and the Microsoft TechNet security advisory.
Yeah, if you want to go entertain yourself with that wonderful read. I don't mean to pick on Microsoft. It's just they have such a culture of acronyms, and it just permeates out into their literature. And the thing is they're Microsoft acronyms. They're not. I mean, they also use a lot of industry acronyms, but sometimes they just make up their own acronyms, and you have to kind of remind yourself every time you read it what it means, and it's just obnoxious.
Some of the other things. This exploit apparently is being used in some state-sponsored malware, and
really? Google
and Microsoft have both had advisories about it, and it seems that it seems unreasonable that it's been a couple of weeks now and there's still no fix for it.
Yeah, and Microsoft has been so good these last few years when something actually goes public.
Yeah, well, it seems this one was being actively exploited before they announced it. So I think they found out that there was an exploit after people were exploiting it, rather than the typical process we see where a researcher finds a bug, reports it to Microsoft, gives them some time to come up with a patch.
Which gives them the appearance of being timely.
Yeah. So then they release the announcement with the patch on the same day, or release the announcement a couple days after the patch has gone out, depending on the severity. And but in this case, it seems the exploit was being actively exploited in the wild before Microsoft knew about it. And so that might explain the delay.
I like the chat room. The chat room's got a good conspiracy mind. They're like, well, maybe the reason why they haven't released the fix yet is because state governments are using it.
Yes, but the problem is that regular cybercriminals are using it as well, so they need to plug it up.
Microsoft will patch it. They just have to get it out of there. All right, Alan, should we talk about...
Because it's such a core thing, they may be very worried about...
Well, it sounds like the fix, this could be one of those cases where Microsoft, every now and then, although they are really good at maintaining compatibility as a general rule of thumb, every now and then they run into something where they're like, yeah, we're gonna have to break compatibility on this one, guys. Sorry, because
they're because this core XML service touches so many applications and is deeply ingrained in Microsoft Office. Any change to it has a huge potential to break all kinds of things.
Exactly. And then what happens?
A lot of testing that has to go on of every patch.
Gosh, and what if it's something as crazy as like you have to make changes to even like the way the docs are saved? And so if you saved it on one version of Word with this patch and you open up on another version of Word that doesn't have the patch, it's not able to read it. I mean, it could be, who knows what they're dealing with. So, all right, sir. Anything else on that one?
Nope.
All right. Let's move on to this next story because I think it's kind of interesting. When we think of like viruses and bacteria for the human body, it's not weird that it can kind of adapt and change and move on and become infectious again. But computer malware can kind of be like that as well. It's not maybe it's not changing on its own, but somebody's tweaking it and it can kind of come back and have another round. Isn't that what's happening?
Well, not exactly. So this Trojan.
Oh man, but I'm so poetic about it, Alan. I mean, come on.
So the I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. Skypot.
Skypot, I think. Yeah. Yes.
Skypot.
Or Skipot. No, Skypot.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. There's a Trojan, and basically it's been around for a while, and it's very popular, but it's being used in a new and interesting way now.
Oh, okay.
So there's been a new variant came out that is being used more effectively than a lot of the previous ones have. So basically, a bunch of phishing emails have been going out, but also targeted web advertisements. So basically, attackers actually buying ads on ad networks.
We've talked about that before being a possibility.
But it's not the ad that's infected. It's actually the site that it sends you to.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Because then it gets because probably that makes sense. Because then they can keep checking those ads for malware, and they're gonna
obviously. An easy way to infect a lot of sites is to actually have your malware be in the advertisement displayed all over the place.
But that's only going to last for so long before the ad network shuts that down.
Yeah, and also that would target basically everybody. And this variant of the Trojan seems to be targeted very specifically on a certain group of people.
Really?
Yeah. So basically, they put up an advertisement that would appeal to these people, and then try to direct them to the site where they will get infected.
Do you know what kind of people?
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, so the phishing emails and targeted web advertisements are being used to drive users to a site where they're then infected by a drive-by download. So they don't have to click anything to get infected. And this actually happens to be exploiting that Microsoft XML exploit we just talked about.
Look at that.
And basically what's interesting here is that it's one of the first times that I remember that the Skypot Trojan has required zero user interaction for the user to become infected. Previously, Skype mostly relied on file format exploits, so basically embedding itself in Microsoft Office files or PDF files or whatever, and then attaching those to emails and so on. But this latest attack seems to be targeting attendees to the IEEE's Aerospace Conference, the international conference for aerospace engineers, academics, military personnel, and industry leaders.
Okay. So they're what? They must be keyword targeting or something?
Yeah. So basically they make ads that are specifically targeted to people that are going to go to this conference.
Okay. That's pretty clever.
Well, we saw something similar to this before. I don't remember the exact details, but we reported on email that was sent out to look like an invitation to a conference like this. It was a PDF file that was infected. But anyway, researchers have found a version of the variant that was programmed to steal credentials from a program called Active Identity Active Client, which is the smart card application used by the U.S. Department of Defense's Common Access Card system, which is a smart card system that they use for the Department of Defense and the contractors as a single access token that works for all the different systems.
You sign into the computer with that authenticates you to the intranet, it probably authenticates you to all kinds of things.
Like, I think it opens physical doors as well.
I want one of those for my house.
Yeah. This could result in the compromise of those smart cards, which might allow an attacker to gain access to really highly sensitive materials or even sensitive locations.
Oh, man. Jeez. You know, when you get this kind of... This is the problem, actually.
These specifically are these advanced persistent threats where they're highly... There's lots of Trojans on the internet that just try to infect any idiot with a web browser.
Right.
And, those are a problem, but it's not quite the same as this Trojan, which is trying to steal your smart card data, and it's specifically targeting people that are going to this conference because they have information about aerospace stuff. Which
this is the thing, is it? And these ad networks, as they get better at this kind of stuff, I mean, like, when I experimented with buying Facebook ads, and I couldn't believe the level of, like, I could be like male Star Trek fans that live in this area of the world who have not liked these. I mean, like, all kinds of just insanely specific things that have dogs, you know, with friends. I mean, I don't know. It's nuts, Alan. Think about how targeted you get. This stuff's going to happen all the time, right? And when it's so targeted like this, it's so small scale that I bet a lot of times we won't even hear about it.
Exactly. Especially when it's targeting things like the Department of Defense, it's in their interest to try to keep that quiet.
Because A, they don't want copycats, and B, it looks bad.
Yep.
Wow. All right. Any other thoughts on that one?
No, but the links have some extra info, and it's quite interesting.
All right, Alan, let's talk about this next story. It's one for the folks across the pond, and I believe it's about universities over there flunking their SSL tests.
Yes. Now, no one seems to have done a similar study in the U.S. to see if there's, if the same thing happens over here. So basically, Tech Week Europe, which is a magazine, did a survey of the top 50 universities in the UK, and basically ran their websites through SSL Labs, which has a test to basically give you a letter grade on how well your SSL is set up.
Yeah. Okay.
And a third of the top 50 universities in the UK failed the test.
Oh, come on, guys. You guys are supposed to be like better than the rest because you're academic about it and all that kind of stuff.
So many of the schools received grades of C or D instead of the expected A. And a lot of this is just configuration and old software and so on. Support for SSL v2, which is, 5 or 6 or more years ago, it may have been useful to support it for people that had old browsers or were using like Windows 98 or something. But, we're pretty much past that now. And so this kind of stuff needs to be turned off because it has vulnerabilities. A weakness in the key algorithm or a bunch of other ones has found that, with such weaknesses in the implementation of SSL could allow an attacker to inject data into an encrypted packet. So basically they can include one of these Microsoft SQL or XML exploits in a packet you're getting from a website you trust. So you're logging into your university page to submit some research or something, and you end up getting your computer infected.
Yeah.
And then, they're trying to steal your research, right? If this stuff is highly targeted, it could be actually trying to get something. Also, they could hijack your session or, try to compromise the data you're submitting.
What do you think, Al? I mean, you've worked in universities.
Well, a lot of universities' websites are run on Microsoft servers, and, they're like, oh, yeah, we're still using Windows Server 2003 or whatever, and things like that. But
probably very likely, yeah.
Basically, many of the schools, when Tech Week reported to them about the bad results, were quick to respond with fixing it, basically proving that it's a small configuration change to get that to change. And but a lot of the schools said, we're hesitant to make any changes because of fear of affecting accessibility. We don't know how many of our users are using old browsers that this isn't going to work on or something to that effect.
Right.
Although I think if you follow the best practices guide that I've linked in the show doc, it has support for the algorithms that old browsers will still support, but that are still good. You just need to disable support for the algorithms that are not good anymore.
There you go. There you go. That's interesting.
I also included a link to the test of scaleengine.com where it shows that we get an A.
Hey, well done, sir. Very nice. So people should go check their own sites. That'd be cool.
Yeah. If you're using SSL, especially if you're doing any kind of e-commerce, you should check the site.
Yeah.
And Green Potato Chip just put the link in the chat room.
There you go. There you go. Thank you, Green Potato Chip. And that is a great spot for us to take a pause and mention GoDaddy.com. This week's sponsor of the GoDaddy of the TechSNAP program. Thank you to GoDaddy. And one of the things they do super, super easy is make the whole buying experience very, very straightforward. So, for example, if you want to get yourself a .com, and I've got a great deal for you, so stay tuned for that. You can also get the SSL certificate, and you can throw it up on a server, and then you can toss WordPress on there, and all in a matter of about 15, 20 minutes. And it really is a very impressive thing you can do. And you know what I've started doing, Alan, is just to make life a little easier on people. And I know this at first doesn't sound like I'm making life easier, but I know it's sort of used to be the role of the subdomain, but I'm upgrading it. I'm doing things like I've registered jblive.fm. Right? So you're with me? So jblive.fm, if you put that in your browser or an IceCast compatible client player, yeah, it tunes in the 128K stream. And if you type in jblive.am, it tunes in the 64 kilobit stream. AM for the 64-bit, FM for the 128 kilobit, right? And because we're going to be, in the next few weeks, we're going to be putting kind of a lot of more content on that radio station. We're going to be working with podcasters and get them on there. And I wanted to make it really easier for people on the go to do that kind of stuff. And that was where I kind of stepped back and I thought, a simple DNS registration, I go to GoDaddy.com, I register jblive.fm, and then what I do is in their control panel area, I just set it to just do a DNS forwarder. So it's just so easy because you register the domain, and then 10 minutes later you go in there, you set your DNS forwarder up, and Bob's your uncle. It's all done, and it's going to whatever website or destination you want. And if you want to get a .com for crazy cheap, check this out. You can get a .com for $4.95, up to 3 domains for $4.95 each. I know.
That's such a good price. They had to put a limit on how many you could buy.
Yeah. So just use the code 495tech when you check out. 495 tech, and you'll get yourself a .com for $4.95. So there you go. And thank you to GoDaddy for supporting this week's episode of TechSNAP. All right, Alan, should we jump into the TechSNAP feedback?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com using the contact link at the top of Jupiter Broadcasting to get a hold of us, or by using our Reddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And we need more people over there all the time, you guys. Get those numbers up. Get in there, get voting, and get submitting. But all right, Alan, we've already got our questions submitted for this week. So are you ready for the first one?
Yes.
This is the one I teased at the top of the show, where I think there's some real value in our answer for this one, but here it goes. So, of course, they can deduct some points because I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of his name. Avid, I think, writes, "Hi, Chris and Alan. I love Lass, and I'm a regular viewer of TechSNAP from episode number 1. He also donates torrent bandwidth for the torrent feeds for the shows, so thank you for doing that. He says his question is as follows. My company, the company that I work for, is planning on building a new colo in which the servers are planned to be multi-tenanted. As IT ops, our goal is to make it so the company's product environment for production, staging, QA, and developing could all reside on the same physical servers, where an environment is composed of at least 2 of everything, i.e. 2x web, 2x app, 2x DB, etc. Moreover, we would like the ability to scale the environment in response to demand, as in add more VMs to handle the load and take them down when they are no longer required. In addition, even multiple customers that would require all of the above is being considered. Or even multiple customers that would require, So they have potentially a mix that they might have to do of that setup. Right. To that end, we obviously are going to use some virtualization, but that can only bring us so far. We are looking into using a platform/framework that would enable an instantaneously click of a button deployment that we could expose to the new dev and QA teams. We're trying to decide what would be the best set of technologies to achieve this goal, and we're looking into CloudStack/OpenStack, Puppet, and Fabric, all writing on Citrix Zen. We're still open to suggestions on all counts, and would like to hear if there are any other technologies that you can recommend we have a look at, or some pitfalls we can avoid with a good design. Thanks in advance."
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's a big question, but basically what they want to do is have, when a company wants to deploy an app, they would get a bunch of separate environments. So you can have your dev and your QA and your live or whatever, and each of those would consist of a bunch of virtual machines. So they have web servers, application servers, database servers, and so on.
But they don't want to waste money and run hardware that they don't need to run or have.
Right. So they're going to virtualize that. But at some point, if one of these apps gets busy, it's going to need more than 2 application servers. So they want to have it scale up and start more application servers almost automatically.
Yeah.
And that gets really complicated.
Yeah.
The advantage to using something like they were talking about OpenStack is that OpenStack has an API for that, also OpenStack has 2 APIs. It has its own one, and then it has one that's compatible with the Amazon API. So basically, if your customer maybe has already developed some stuff at Amazon, it would be compatible still. So that's another
and that would be a way to really have some immediate, like, we're launching version 2.0 of our app, and we're going to have a ton of traffic tomorrow.
Yep.
That would, being able to offload that to EC2 would be an instantaneous way to scale.
Right, and basically these guys want to build their own version of EC2.
Yeah,
that's what it is. And
I would say
if they used OpenStack, that means that some of the tools people have already written for doing stuff at Amazon would work on their cloud stack as well.
But I think it works the other way too. I would say don't rule out the possibility of maybe eventually moving some stuff to EC2 just for some offloading. So having it be compatible both ways is valuable in that regard too. Yeah,
I can do a talk about scale engines considering a system like that with pushing overflow to Amazon, except for not doing it unless it's absolutely necessary.
Right, because it's expensive.
Well, because Amazon costs more than we charge our customers.
Right, yeah. I mean, it would have to be integrated down to the billing level.
Yeah. But basically, so if you use something like OpenStack, you can, because of the API, you can script things. So you could even have like a Nagios monitoring of your virtual machines and then alert when they get to, say, 70% of capacity. And that will actually cause it to spin up another virtual machine.
Right.
And then when that kicks in the load balancing, the load on all those servers should go down. Although you have to put in a lot of sanity checks and things like that, because otherwise it'll just spin up 100 virtual machines.
The commercial Zen offerings too offer flexibility like that too as part of their system. So and if he's going to be running on Zen, that's probably something he'll look into. What do you think about in terms of configuration management and deployment? He mentioned Puppet.
Well, basically, in order to one-click deploy these things, you're going to have pre-built virtual machine images.
Yeah.
And then, if you integrate something like Puppet or something in there so that when the image spins up, it gets a unique host name and then pulls down your most up-to-date config, that does make sense.
You might even there might even be a way to script that, because a lot of the stuff like the host name and the unique MAC address and all that kind of stuff, like the host name, you could just write out a new version of the file that has a different host name, and a lot of times you can pull out a lot of the unique identifiers, and the hypervisor will regenerate them the first time the machine boots. So it's usually even possible at a file system level to just automate a deployment like that.
Yep. And that way you can keep spinning these up, and then if you do something proper with Zen like that, where you have your separate iSCSI storage, it means that if one physical machine gets overloaded, you can start moving certain virtual machines off to different machines, or even have failover. If one of your physical machines dies, you can just spin the instances back up on a different piece of hardware.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not using local storage, if you're using your network storage.
So I would say kind of key points here are use something that's universally compatible like OpenStack. Use centralized storage with something that's like an iSCSI backend storage.
Yep. And set it up for high availability so that if something breaks, it can transition over.
And generally, does that mean don't use NFS? Use something like iSCSI? What are your opinions on that of virtualizing and using NFS as the backend storage?
NFS should still work as long as, but you basically, you're creating a single point of failure, right? If the NFS server goes down, then you're kind of pooched. Yeah. Although basically you have the same problem with iSCSI either way, right?
Yeah, but those are sort of designed to run in that scenario, and you can have multiple controllers and whatnot in iSCSI. Yeah. So centralized storage would be a big part of that too.
But
and
if you're trying to do this properly, then you might consider, especially for high availability, you have to do something like Amazon with its availability zones, where instead of having all this stuff in one colo, you would need a second one somewhere. So you wouldn't have to do replication between them or anything, but what you'd want to have it set up is so that the clients have stuff spun up at the second location. So if the first one ever goes down, load switches over automatically.
Yeah.
Like Amazon basically doesn't guarantee that your Amazon instance won't go down. They just say if you have instances in multiple availability zones, one of them should still be up. Although there have been problems that affected all of them before.
Well, yeah. So there you go. So and also then I'd say I agree with Alan. And the other nice thing about when you mentioned use Nagios, because Nagios could do some of the monitoring for load.
Yeah, and can trigger stuff.
It's also a monitoring engine. So it's sort of like one of these, it's not a unitasker, which is what I really like, because some of the other solutions, like even the built-in Zen stuff, it really only works if you're using a complete Zen solution top to bottom, using Zen tools, everything works just right. The nice thing about using a tool like Nagios is then you're also using monitoring, you're getting historical graphs if you want, and you also then a little more flexible on what the virtualization backend can be. So I would say do things like that. So do things like the API, so you can move, you can overflow if you need, or you can have people that you can use existing tools that have been created. Use Nagios to manage. Look at Puppet, but just consider maybe going with the file system route for virtual machine deployment if you can, and then also make sure you use centralized storage like an iSCSI backend. Yeah. Yep. There we go, right? I think I just summed it all up right there in the first few points. And that's the best we could probably do without actually seeing sort of like what the actual program is going to be, what the database requirements are, and things like that. But all right, Alan, you ready for the next question?
Yep.
All right, this one's a good one, and it comes in from Dale, and he says, I think this is, I caught this one. I thought this would be interesting to bring up here because it's a good question to ask. Dale writes, I just tried to renew my wife's cosmetology license online, but I forgot her password. I clicked on the forgot your password link, and guess what? The state of California sent my login and password to me via email in clear text. The same site also stores her social security number. Do you suppose they encrypt that? And the question sound right if they're not encrypting your username and password,
because you shouldn't encrypt a password. Password should be hashed, which is different.
But you know what he's saying, right? If they don't obscure
if they're not using hashing on the password. The way to tell is basically if you request a password reset from a site and they then tell you your old password, that means they must have been storing it in plain text. If they send you a new randomly generated password, it's more likely that they were hashing it and therefore don't know the original plain text password.
I just signed up as a trial for SiriusXM's internet streaming to see how it is, and they don't let you set your password. And then they email you with your username, which you set, and your password that they've set for you, and it's just right there in the email. They don't let you choose it. It's kind of weird,
right?
Before we go to
the way to test is to go change your password or whatever, and then try to do a reset and see if it tells you your old password. And if it does, it's bad.
This topic has generated some interest in the subreddit and on the comments on our site. Real quick, it's just really important that to Dasani in the chat room, or Dursani, that I mentioned that one of the things that Avid might want to look into is Alias. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it is the world's best cloud management software, and it's free, and he really loves it. He was talking about it during that entire last question. So, all right, Alan, the last quote-unquote email, but it's actually just a contact, or it's just a
we didn't actually answer the guy's question, but it's very likely that, yes, they're just storing everything in a plain text database, and you should be afraid.
Yes. Oh, okay, I thought you did say that. Okay, all right. Be concerned, I would say. The comment that I wanted to feature that came from Beep on last week's episode is he was responding to the guy that wanted to sync between a bunch of his websites and set up a bunch of load balancing stuff. He said, for syncing several servers, I think you could also look into a parallel file system like OCF S2 or Gluster and set them up in a high available settings. And he supplied some links there. And I can't remember if we actually mentioned a file system like that. I know it crossed my mind.
We talked about some distributed file systems like AndrewFS and Coda, but I don't think we talked about those type of ones.
The parallel write systems.
Yeah,
okay,
I've looked at a couple of different ones, and none of them have ever seemed robust enough for me to want to use them in production.
They kind of scare the hell out of me, but that's.
Yeah, is there anything scarier than a experimental file system?
Right. Well, I'm running ButterFS on one of my laptops, so I'll tell you in a few weeks.
Yeah, but that's a laptop. That's not quite the same as running this with your database on top of it or something.
Yeah, no, totally. All right. Well, before we jump out of feedback, I just wanted to give a thanks to Alan. Who was it in the chat room that created this techwarstories.com site? I've already forgot about it, but it's an awesome. Marshall, that's right. Marshall created this, and it is every episode that we've done a war story. Which I love because he's got a link to the show notes, but then he's also got a YouTube time embed link, so you can actually go to the exact moment in that episode where the war story started, which is just awesome. Let's just jump right to it. Oh boy, look at TechSNAP episode 8. Wow, we have some serious headphone action going on in that episode. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, So there you go. If you want to go listen to the old war stories, we've got all of them. And I think we'll probably do some new war stories coming up. It's just we've had huge shows to pack all this stuff into.
Yep.
So thanks to Marshall for doing that. If you'd like to email us a question, email it to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or go use that contact link at the top of the website. All right, Alan. Well, I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. The Roundup are the stories that didn't make it to the top of the show. If we still want to talk about them a little bit, they're almost always exclusively powered by the TechSNAP subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And we generally...
I wouldn't say exclusively, but yes.
Well, you know what I say, though? Generally, almost always exclusively.
All the ones Chris added were from...
No, I just always like my play of words. And nobody ever calls me out on it, but it's generally almost always exclusively powered. Generally, almost always. I'm such a weasel. And of course, we mainly supply these because we didn't have a full time to dive into them, but we still think they're interesting and thought you might want to follow up on them. All right, Alan, should we cover the first story in the roundup?
Yep.
All right, sir. This one has our TechSNAP subreddit up in a furry, and also a lot of other places on the internet. Cisco is pushing Cloud Connect router firmware that allows web history tracking, and this is an automatic update they are pushing down to Cisco routers. Reports have started popping up that Cisco is pushing out automatically, without permission, this new Cloud Connect firmware on consumers' routers. This new firmware removes the user's ability to log in and administer the router locally. You must now configure the router using Cisco's Cloud Connect service. It wasn't bad enough. The fine print for this new service allows Cisco to track your complete internet history. Currently, it appears the only way to disable Cloud Connect service is to unplug your router from the internet. Can you believe this crap?
Yeah, and but in a follow-up story that I added to the roundup, Cisco appears to be pulling back from its previous attempts to amend the privacy policy on some of its routers to allow them to collect web history.
Yay! Good.
Now, I don't know if that means they're still going to take away your ability to locally administer some of your routers.
You know, but that honestly, I'm surprised this hasn't been done already if you think about it. Because what it probably does is it probably does some sort of... Honestly, I think the hardest thing for people when they buy a router is general users is setting it up. They take it home, they plug it in, and it is beyond their comprehension because they've never done anything like it before.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's
is what
why
they're
most
trying
of them
to fix.
come with a basic config that kind of just works when you plug it in.
Right, but how many times have we been like, yeah, well, all these routers that ship with this default now have this problem? You know?
Right. And so with this, it would allow Cisco to update all of those more easily.
Right.
And so, yes. But yeah, now I'm sure the web history tracking was more of an aggregate thing to try to figure out what's breaking routers or whatever. But it's obviously hinky. And luckily, big enough backlash as they seem to be pulling away from this idea of keeping track of all of your web history.
I really, though, have no interest in a router that functions like this.
Right. Now, it's great to buy for like your grandma.
I guess,
or people that don't know what they're doing
because
or whatever.
I could theoretically log into her account and change settings for her.
Right.
That's kind of nice.
But yeah, at my house, my router is a 2-foot tall server that's full of hard drives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
My router runs FreeBSD.
Yeah, that's not going to fly.
Yeah.
All right, well, I know a lot of you probably by this point already know that story, but I just saw so much heat behind that I thought we should talk about it in the roundup.
And I thought it was important to put that follow-up in there.
Yep, link to that in the show notes. All right, well, this is great. In fact, Europe declares the independence from Hollywood with their act of vote. This deserves a belly clap here. I'm going to, you know what, belly clap, Alan. There you go. Say a belly clap. There you go.
Yeah, do you have the numbers handy for the vote?
I'll see if it's in here. I didn't. Yeah, actually, I do. Look at that. How great is that?
Because the part I found interesting is read off the numbers.
All right. So the number is the European Parliament's rejection of ACTA by the vote 478 to 39.
With there's a third number, isn't there?
I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, okay. But basically, there were over 100 abstentions where people didn't vote.
Oh.
And I'm not that familiar with the EU's Congress or whatever it was called there. But it seems like it has an awful lot of people in it.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, seriously. Well, there's a lot of tea to drink.
Yeah, but I just found it interesting that the number of people that didn't vote so heavily outweighed the people that did vote against rejecting ACTA.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's really awesome.
It's good to see that it got rejected. It's just weird that such a large number of the people on this government body didn't vote either way.
Oh, that's just because they're owned, Alan. They're bought and paid for.
Right. Well, I'm guessing the ones that are bought and paid for are the ones that voted against it.
Or didn't vote. That's another way to be bought and paid for, but not have it on your record.
I suppose. But if you got bought and then didn't stop it from passing, then you're probably not going to get bought again next year.
Very true. Very true. All right. Well, just a good story, and it's something we followed on TechSNAP for a few months now. So I wanted to follow up on that. All right, Alan, did you hear about this whole story where Microsoft was actually adding Skype to Windows Update? Did you catch this?
No, I didn't know that.
This happened very briefly, and Microsoft's already backtracked on that. And that's what the register story is Microsoft backtracking on that decision. But this and what happened was and this was the administrator's fault. But the way I found out about this story is some fools out there had their Windows Update server for their LAN set to automatically distribute recommended updates, and Microsoft put it in the recommended updates category or optional, whatever it was, and they actually started pushing Skype out to people's workstations. Well, this new Skype includes advertising. So a lot of people got really upset. And now Microsoft has pulled back from doing that. But, I expected a lot of different types of integration with Skype, but I didn't actually expect this one. So,
well, Skype's update process has been kind of naggy and annoying before.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense to roll it into Microsoft Update, not Windows Update, Microsoft Update, the one that also updates Office and all your other Microsoft software. But in this case, it seems like it was installing it on computers that maybe didn't even have it installed in the first place, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah, one guy writes, this is a sysadmin says, I administer several banks that belong to a holding company, and I had to dispatch techs immediately to remove the software from approximately 25 machines the first thing this morning because they were in the middle of an IT audit, and Skype definitely is not going to pass. You know what? Don't distribute recommended updates. Only do critical if you're going to not. The way I've always managed WSUS in the end is since Microsoft just generally does patches on one Tuesday of the month, I just go in there and I approve stuff. That's just been the system that works for me. But if you want to turn on stuff automatically like that, that's what's going to happen. Yep. It's kind of their own fault in a way. Although Microsoft, but come on. All right, Alan.
Well, even a lot of times with your WSUS or whatever, you want to wait a couple of days for anything that's not critical because Microsoft has how many times had to make a patch for the patch?
Wait and catch the buzz and see what people are saying. Check forums.
The critical ones have to go out right away. That makes sense. You have to, make sure your machines aren't vulnerable to exploits and so on. But a lot of those non-critical updates, it's best to wait a couple of days.
All right, so this next story has my eyebrow raised. Wait for it. Whoop, there we go. Because Microsoft has claimed that they have discovered an Android botnet, a botnet running on Android devices. This is an article running in ZDNet. A Microsoft engineer has discovered and identified an Android botnet that is sending out spam on an industrial and international scale using an Android app that gets installed on people's computers. I don't know why. I guess Microsoft is just really getting in the business of it.
Well, it gets installed on people's computers or on their mobile?
On their Android. It's now I don't really know much about this because that's why I toss it in the roundup. But and what they're doing is they're generating money after spam emails are being sent from Yahoo mail servers on Android devices. A closer look at the email hit information shows that all of the messages come from compromised Yahoo accounts. Furthermore, they are stamped with "Sent from Yahoo Mail on Android" in the signature. So it's like a Trojan version of the Yahoo Mail app or something.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Microsoft has more details on their MSNDN blog, which the link on the ZDNet page links to, but then when you go there, they say page not found. And I really haven't heard a lot of other people covering this now. I don't know if that's just because the story kind of broke this morning, or actually last night, which was the 4th of July in the U.S., so things are kind of wonky or what, but yeah. All right, well, this is an interesting story, and it shows what could become a huge problem for independent software developers and big companies alike when the app system that's out there goes a little awry. This is from this was a post from Marco.org.
Which is the guy that makes
Instapaper.
Instapaper, yeah.
And also the original guy that created Tumblr. And he said that the App Store, at least for a period of time, was distributing corrupt binaries that which would just crash immediately when launched on an iOS device. And
because it was an update, it basically people's iPhones started auto-updating his app, and then the new version wouldn't work. And specifically, he recommended that anybody who's planning on making an update to an App Store app, wait a few days for this issue to be resolved before they do so, specifically because he got a lot of one-star reviews on his app because it crashed immediately.
He's got a huge list now of all of the different apps that have been
affected.
Yeah.
And Apple hasn't commented or acknowledged the issue at this point.
Traditional Apple. I mean, really.
But it's just interesting that basically it can hurt his sales so bad by having all these one-star reviews and maybe falling off the recommended apps page because of it, all because of something that's actually Apple's fault.
Yeah, I mean, of course he's going to say that because he's paranoid. I wouldn't be surprised if they remove those reviews, because they've had a distribution problem before, and then they pulled the reviews. You know what the people are suspecting?
But some of the reviews, how do they know that this review is a problem because it was an Apple? Like, how do you say?
Well, what they did last time is they just deleted all reviews from the time period that the distribution problem existed. This isn't actually the first time this has happened, and it was the same thing which they suspected as this time is a corruption with the fair play encryption. It's because every app is encrypted by Apple once it's because the apps are signed and secured by Apple after they leave the developer, and they go through the encryption process at Apple. So the app work.
Apple does that as part of their. They approve every update before it goes into the App Store, which is interesting to talk about. It's not a story that we're covering this week, but there's some malware in the App Store that basically uploads your phone book to a remote server.
And it's the same app
that's approved. The app's also on Google, but basically Apple audited and approved the application.
This what floors me, is it's made it through both. I mean, the Android marketplace also does have some vetting. It's just automated. Mm-hmm. And it went through the Android vetting process and it made it through the Apple vetting process in both of these places. One thing before we jump off the story is one of the things that Marco Arment, who wrote that blog post, has been doing, which I just think is great, is he's showing I saw the story when he posted it originally because I was just trolling Hacker News and I was like, what's this? And he's been following how all of the different quote unquote news outlets are spinning this story by taking his own stuff and then just reposting it. And he's sort of cataloging like all the different claims and the different ways and giving credit when people get it right and giving credit when people get it wrong. Like The Next Web really took his article and like changed all his places where he said I to we, but otherwise it's the same exact article from his blog. And I just love, because as doing these shows, I watch this happen, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, where one story just gets reposted and reposted and reposted, and they don't ever really credit the original source. People take stuff from our show notes all the time and go post news stories on the web and never link back to us.
Or the place where we got the information from. Because, for example, I'm looking at some of this stuff right here, and he's like, PC Magazine rewrote the article and included some full statements, and they cite the source of the list of apps as The Next Web.
Which was just which just copied his site
from his site. Yes.
Yeah. That's the problem with that. We gotta have the clicks mentality to news approach. Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, let's wrap up this round up with these last few stories here. This one is, we mentioned it earlier in the show, but researchers are warning of a hole in Keepass, the password manager.
So someone found a remotely exploitable hole in Keepass, although it's fairly hard to exploit because the user has to import a malformed password database into their Keepass.
Okay.
So you'd have to somehow trick the user into doing this. So it's not a serious issue, but it is an issue that could cause someone to gain the ability to get access to all of your plain text passwords.
Right. Okay. So it's not red alert, but if you export import password databases.
Right. Basically, the code that fixes this has been committed, but the next version of Keepass isn't coming out for a couple of months. But there is a developer build you can download if you want to get the fixed version today.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So basically, the developer doesn't consider it to be serious enough to bother doing a new release today, or a couple of days ago when the story came out. But if you would like the newer version, there is a developer build that you can grab.
Now, this next story you tossed in here sounds pretty wild. Wireless hacking suspected in air raid siren. Misuses.
Well, basically, in Illinois, they use the air raid sirens to warn people about tornadoes and so on.
Oh, okay. It's like the old school, okay.
Yeah, and basically it's a weather warning system.
Yeah.
But a couple of days ago, a bunch, or maybe it was today, I'm not sure of the date, but at 7:30 at night in a different town after 9 at night, the air raid siren started going off. And the one, even after the authorities turned the air raid siren off, it went off again.
Oh, how annoying.
You had to actually cut power to it to keep it from going off.
You know, I laugh, but like we wouldn't be able to do a show if that was happening here.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have to
we don't have something like that here, but we don't have that kind of weather, I suppose.
We don't have anything like that here either, though. It sounds really badass, and it's a great way to alert the public if aliens invade. So it's not a bad idea. All right, Alan. Oh,
but so there's some claims that it may be a hacker or something.
Yeah.
Although the one town says that theirs can only be triggered from the 911 center, and that no one was authorized to do so, and so it shouldn't have happened. But they don't really provide any details. The second town says that theirs is triggered by sending a wireless signal with a special code. But if that's sent in the clear, it seems to me someone that can, listen on a random radio frequency could record the code being sent to the sirens and then just play it back later and cause it, right?
Go all Steve Mitnick on them. Or Kevin Mitnick.
Yeah, but basically, if you just record the code when it's being sent or the command and then play it back later, it's called a replay attack. Mm-hmm. It means that, their secret code doesn't change, and the secret code probably should have some kind of like time or date stamp so that it rotates automatically.
That'd be a good idea.
Basically, it seems like it's just completely unencrypted command sent over the radio in the clear.
Yeah.
So that anyone
what could go wrong, Alan?
Anyone who knows the code can cause the air raid siren to go off.
All right. Well, that's kind of funny. All right. Should we talk about this last story sort of as a warning, never to take a picture of your debit card or something like that?
Yes.
All right.
Basically, there's a new Twitter account out there where they've been tagging everybody's Instagram and TwitPic and so on pictures where the person happens to be showing their credit card or debit card. Some people, they're like, oh, I lost my credit card and I finally found it, and they show a picture of it or something.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, well, your credit card number is written on that. You realize that, right?
I think there's apps out there that for some reason or other they have you take a picture of your credit card, and I don't remember what it was for. But
there's been a few times where I've been asked for a scan of my credit card to make a purchase, usually when I'm buying an online service, but very rarely. And it's really not a good, that's why we have things like CVV codes and so on instead, because it's a cumbersome process and it's not the right way to do it.
Wow, Alan, I think that's the whole show right there. I think we just did it. That was a lot of really great stuff. Now, I did tease towards the middle of the show there that Jupiter Broadcasting is working on a new radio project. And if you'd like to know more information about that, subscribe to our newsletter, which will be coming out, I don't know when, but the July edition has not been released yet. So if you want to get that, go over to bit.ly/JupiterSignal, bit.ly/JupiterSignal, and I'll try to remember to put a sign-up form in the show notes. That's our monthly newsletter that Jupiter Broadcasting does. We only send it out once a month. We don't spam. It just kind of tells you what's going on, stuff that doesn't really quite fit into the shows because we like to focus on content. We tell you in the newsletter, so check that out. The radio station will be probably an ongoing update in that newsletter, so that's where you can find it. Also, Alan, I would always suggest people join us live, like the fine people in the jblive.tv chat room have joined us this week.
Yes.
You can do so at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv or
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Well done, sir. Like right on cue. I love it. And you can give us your thoughts in the chat room or ask us questions. Also, one of the things people don't probably know if they only watch the show recorded, which we still love, is there's some time between the different segments of the show where we just kind of hang out and chat with the chat room often. So if you've got questions or if you've seen something on the show that you want to know information about, you want to talk to us live,
you want to see me make fun of Chris.
Yeah, that's usually when that happens, is off air, because Alan is at least nice to ridicule me when the recorder isn't going, generally. And that'll happen then too. So it's always fun. It's like extra long TechSNAP, if you can believe that, even longer.
Yep.
So, all right, Alan, well, thank you, sir. Great show.
Yep, you too.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.